according to what I read, we had more than 45,000 people shot to death in America in 2020. We had a spike in violence in 2021. And the vast majority of those gun deaths were suicide. So it's not all homicide, but a fair amount of homicide too. And America's the biggest gun country in the world. And in particular, what gets people talking about it is the mass shootings, right? Like what we saw in Michigan, this kid, Ethan Crumbley, going into the school and shooting other teenagers. His parents have now been arrested. It's a fascinating case. But we also see it when innocent civilians or police officers are shot to death by people who had no business having guns or the kind of gun that they had. And that's where I'll kick it off, because here in New York, overnight, the second police officer died who was shot by that 44-year-old suspect. He also died. The suspect has died since. But these cops were called to this house in Harlem by the suspect's mom. They were walking down the hallway to go into his room and see what was wrong. And he came out. They didn't stand a chance. He came out guns blazing, shot the cops, both of whom are now dead. One was 22. He was shot and killed. And now we have, and his name, by the way, was Jason Rivera. And then there's Wilbert Mora, just 27. It's so awful. It's just so awful. And Stephen, I'll start with you as somebody who is used to sort of defending gun rights. A lot of people looked at that modification he had on his gun, which I understand was not lawful. I don't know that that was the reason the cops died. You know, he could have shot him just without that modification. But should that guy have had a gun, career criminal? And is there a gun law that could have prevented it?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, there's a lot to unpack with a situation like that, with domestic violence call that leads to, the death of law enforcement officers. Is a horrific tragedy. And obviously, I think most people would question, well, how could this happen? How can we prevent this going forward? And there are a number of ways. I mean, oftentimes in situations like that, what you'll find, and this is true for many mass shootings as well, some of the most famous ones that we know, the shooter was prohibited. They weren't legally allowed to own guns in the first place due to their either mental health history or their criminal history, such as in this case. And the question is, how do you keep somebody who is already prohibited from owning guns under federal law, so in the entire country, from obtaining them? And that's where a lot of the controversy comes in, because there's different proposals on that range from better enforcement.
Right, but let me just stop you there. Let me just stop you. Yeah. Forgive my interruption, but I want to make sure we all stay on the same page. So he should not, this 44-year-old man, now dead, the shooter, should not have had a gun. Why?
Well, he had a criminal history that included either a felony conviction or misdemeanor domestic violence conviction. Then he shouldn't have been able to obtain it, or at least he wouldn't legally have been able to possess the gun in the first place.
So we see it all the time, though, with criminals. We see it all the time with criminals who commit domestic violence or some other crime, some other felony. They get out of jail. It seems very easy. It seems very easy for them to get a gun. Am I wrong?
No, I mean, it can be very easy for people who are prohibited, people who are known criminals, to obtain guns illegally outside of the current system that we have in place to buy guns. Through licensed dealers with background checks involved. There's obviously proposals to expand that system to private sales as well. That's where a lot of the controversy comes in with so-called universal background checks, because the idea there is that private sales should also have to go through the background check system like sales from licensed dealers do. Although, of course, in this case, you're talking about New York, which has a law like that in place already. And obviously, a lot of criminals just don't comply with it. And they sell guns knowingly.
That's the problem. And this gets right to the heart of it right off the top, right? So it's like, Mike, we do have tough gun laws in New York City. And yet there was this guy sitting with this gun with this unlawful modifier on it. Again, I don't think it wasn't the modifier that led to the death of the cops. A regular old gun could have killed these cops just as easily. But the point is just how easy it is, despite the fact this is a career criminal sitting there with a gun. I don't know. I'd love a real solution. I would. I'm so open-minded on this issue. I've been the victim of a crime, and so I appreciate guns with the good guys who protect us. But I have 3 kids, and I certainly worry about, school shootings and the other stuff too. So I'd love to see a gun reform that could actually stop the bad guys from getting the guns. But we passed every single one of the gun reforms Joe Biden's pushing right now. That guy still would have had this gun.
Yeah, I think the problem across the board in America is that we're pretty weak on accountability measures, which is what fuels the illegal gun market. So, for example, one thing, and this in some ways also in a different way relates back to the Michigan shooting that you were talking about, is we have pretty poor storage laws and regulation, especially when it comes to firearms dealers. For example, it is as investigations have shown that the traces done, there's no real requirement in federally licensed firearm dealers or places that sell guns to store them in such a way that they're not easily accessible, which is why these smash and grab situations where people basically just drive a car through the front door and take a hammer and break glass and remove all the weapons and run out, or saw a hole through the ceiling and drop in and take all the guns. Like that's it's a gaping hole in our system that allows legal guns to be trafficked into an illegal market. And I think until we're a lot more serious about regulating gun sellers, that's going to continue to be the pipeline. And obviously the other issue, which we haven't.
How frequent an event is that, Mike, where people are doing this? We've been following the smash and grab of the Gucci bags, but how often does that happen with respect to the guns?
I wish I could give you like a good statistic on that. I mean, I think it's pretty. I mean, I think they're recognized as pretty easy targets, and definitely, per the investigation that I was referencing, we have quite a lot of video showing the ease with which people were able to break into gun shops and steal a ton of weapons. So I guess. Go ahead.
Wait, let him jump in.
I just want to make a quick point here. This is certainly a phenomenon that happens. This is one way that criminals get their guns. Mike's correct on that point, but I would sort of question the idea that it's easy, because given the tactics that are often employed, like as Mike suggested there, literally crashing cars through buildings to get to the guns. I don't know what, that adding an extra safe after you're willing to knock down the wall of a building to get to the guns is going to be much more of a deterrent in preventing these sorts of thefts.
One tactic. Yeah, no, sure. I don't mean it. I mean, maybe that, referencing the car is sort of an extreme example. There are myriad ways in which people break into all manner of facilities, including gun shops. It is. I mean, there's never like a panacea, but in this case, I think another issue, right? When we're talking about like, how did this person get the gun? Another issue is trace data is not publicly available per the law, right, Stephen? So that's something that we can't. And
what do you mean?
There are the argument for meaning like we until I believe was it like the 1980s or 1986, it used to be able. It was the ATF was required to make trace data on guns public, so which is to say that the public could assess or can see where a particular gun came from.